The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Arizona Territory, 1876, startling a flock of birds into flight as Faith Spencer ran for her life, her torn dress catching on sagebrush as she fled from the mining camp that had been her prison for 3 endless months. Her lungs burned with each desperate breath, but the sound of men shouting behind her kept her moving despite the rocks cutting into her bare feet. Faith had escaped Blackstone Mining Camp with nothing but the clothes on her back and a stolen revolver with a single bullet remaining a bullet she'd been saving for herself if recapture became inevitable. Hunter Farley had been tracking a wounded coyote since dawn when he heard the gunshot. Squinting against the harsh midday sun, he spotted a figure stumbling across the scrubland. The woman's honey-blonde hair flew wildly behind her as she ran, her movements frantic and desperate. Hunter nudged his chestnut gelding, Rusty, toward the commotion, his hand resting instinctively on the Colt revolver at his hip. As he drew closer, Hunter could make out 3 men on horseback pursuing the woman. Their shouts carried on the wind promises of punishment that made his jaw clench. He spurred Rusty into a gallop, cutting between the fleeing woman and her pursuers. The woman collapsed to her knees when she saw Hunter approaching, raising the revolver with trembling hands. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. Hunter raised his hands slowly. "I'm not with them, madam. I can help you." The woman's blue eyes, wild with terror, darted between Hunter and the approaching men. Blood had dried on her temple and bruises marked her delicate wrists. "Please," she whispered as the riders drew nearer, "don't send me back there." She shuddered violently, the revolver shaking in her grip. In one fluid motion, Hunter dismounted, gently took the gun from her unresisting fingers and lifted her onto his horse. He swung up behind her, one arm securing her trembling body against his chest. "Hold tight," he instructed, turning Rusty toward the rocky outcroppings that would provide cover. The woman sagged against him, her consciousness fading as exhaustion claimed her. The pursuing men shouted threats, but Hunter didn't slow. He knew these hills better than most had spent 5 years riding this territory as a scout before settling on his small ranch. He guided Rusty through a narrow pass, then up a steep trail that few knew existed. The riders followed for a while before falling behind, unwilling to risk their horses on the treacherous path. By sunset, Hunter had put significant distance between them and the pursuers. He made camp in a sheltered canyon, laying the unconscious woman on his bedroll before building a small, smokeless fire. In the soft glow of the flames, he could better assess her condition. Dirt and dried blood streaked her face, and her simple cotton dress was torn and stained. Her feet were cut and blistered from running barefoot across the harsh terrain. Hunter dampened his bandana with water from his canteen and gently cleaned her face. The woman stirred at his touch, her eyes flying open in panic. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the canyon wall. "Easy," Hunter said softly, keeping his distance. "You're safe now. Who are you?" she demanded, scanning their surroundings with wary eyes. "Name's Hunter Farley. Found you running from those men." He gestured toward his canteen. "Water," she hesitated before thirst overcame caution. Taking the canteen with trembling hands, she drank deeply. "Faith," she said finally, her voice steadier. "Faith Spencer, those men from the mining camp?" Hunter asked, pouring coffee into a tin cup. Faith nodded, accepting the warm cup with both hands. "Blackstone Mining Camp I was. Held there against my will." Hunter's expression darkened. He'd heard rumors about Blackstone, a company town where debt and desperation kept people trapped. Some whispered that women were brought there under false pretenses and forced to work in deplorable conditions. "How long?" he asked quietly. 3 months, Faith replied, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "They said I owed for my passage from Boston, that I had to work it off." Her voice broke. "They lied about everything." Hunter handed her a piece of jerky. "Eat something. We'll head for my ranch at first light. It's about half a day's ride west of here. You'll be safe there while you recover." Faith studied him warily. "Why are you helping me?" Hunter poked at the fire with a stick. "My sister," he said after a long moment. "Elizabeth." She answered an advertisement for a teaching position out west 5 years ago. never arrived where she was supposed to go. He met Faith's eyes across the flames. I've been looking for her ever since. Understanding passed between them. Faith accepted another piece of jerky, chewing slowly. Thank you, she said simply. Hunter nodded, then stood and moved to check on Rusty. Get some rest, Miss Spencer. I'll keep watch. Faith eased back onto the bedroll, too exhausted to protest further. For the first time in months, she closed her eyes without fear. Dawn broke with a gentle orange glow that painted the canyon walls. Faith woke with a start, momentarily disoriented before remembering the previous day's events. Hunter was already awake, saddling Rusty and packing his meager supplies. Morning, he said, noticing her stirring. There's coffee if you want it. Faith sat up slowly, her body aching from the previous day's exertion. She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm tin cup. I need to warn you, Hunter said as he rolled up his bedroll, those men might not give up so easily. Blackstone has a reputation for retrieving their investments. Faith's hand trembled slightly. They won't stop looking. A man called Decker runs the camp. He doesn't let anyone leave. She swallowed hard. I wasn't the only one. Hunter's jaw tightened. How many others? 7 women when I escaped. There were more before. Faith set down her cup, her eyes haunted. 2 didn't survive the winter. Hunter cursed under his breath. We should move. My ranch isn't far, but we need to be cautious. He helped Faith to her feet, noting her wince as she put weight on her injured soles. Without a word, he tore strips from a spare shirt in his saddlebag and wrapped her feet before lifting her onto Rusty. They rode in silence for hours, Hunter leading the horse through ravines and dry creek beds to mask their trail. Faith clung to the saddle horn, occasionally swaying with fatigue. Tell me about Boston, Hunter said eventually, seeking to distract her from her discomfort. Faith hesitated before responding. It was proper, structured. After my parents died, I lived with my aunt. She was kind but ill. When she passed, I had few options. She sighed. The advertisement promised a position as a housekeeper for a respectable family in Santa Fe. Good wages, room, and board. But they took you to Blackstone instead, Hunter finished. Faith nodded. The stagecoach was diverted. When I protested, they said I'd signed a contract, showed me a paper with my forged signature agreeing to work at the camp to repay my travel expenses. Her voice hardened. They called it debt bondage. It was slavery. By midday, the landscape began to change subtly. The barren scrubland gave way to slightly greener terrain. In the distance, Faith could make out a small structure nestled against the foothills. My place, Hunter explained, following her gaze. It's not much, but it's mine. 15 acres, a small herd of cattle, and a stream that hasn't dried up yet. The ranch was modest but well maintained. A sturdy log cabin stood beside a corral and small barn. Chickens scratched in the yard, and a vegetable garden grew alongside the cabin wall. A border collie raced out to greet them, barking excitedly. That's Dash, Hunter said as he helped Faith dismount. Best cattle dog in the territory. Faith swayed slightly as her feet touched the ground, and Hunter steadied her with a hand at her elbow. Up close, she noticed the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, the weathered tan of his skin, the tiny scar bisecting his left eyebrow. He wasn't classically handsome, but his face carried a quiet strength that eased the constant fear she'd lived with for months. Let's get you inside, he said, guiding her toward the cabin. You need rest and proper food. The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while a rough-hewn table and chairs occupied the center of the main room. A curtain partially concealed a bed in one corner. Shelves lined another wall, surprisingly filled with books. Hunter gestured toward the bed. You can rest there. I'll sleep in the barn. Faith shook her head. I can't take your bed. You can and will, Hunter insisted gently. You've been through enough. Too exhausted to argue further, Faith allowed Hunter to help her to the bed. As she sank onto the mattress, she realized it was the first real bed she'd seen since leaving Boston. I'll prepare something to eat, Hunter said, moving to the small kitchen area. Then we need to discuss what happens next. Faith watched him move about the cabin with efficient, practical motions. Despite her wariness, She felt oddly safe in this stranger's home, safer than she'd felt in months. While Hunter prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and dried apple slices, Faith dozed, the soft mattress a luxury she'd nearly forgotten. She woke to the smell of food and the gentle touch of Hunter's hand on her shoulder. "You should eat," he said, helping her sit up. "You need your strength." They ate in silence, Faith forcing herself to take small bites despite her hunger. When she'd finished, Hunter cleared the plates and returned with a steaming basin of water and a bar of soap. "For washing up," he explained, setting it on a small table beside the bed. "I have a shirt and trousers that might fit you. They'll be big but cleaner than." He gestured at her tattered dress. Faith flushed. "Thank you," Hunter nodded, gathering a few items from a chest. "I'll check on the livestock. Take your time." When the door closed behind him, Faith sagged with relief at being alone. The simple kindness of clean water and fresh clothes nearly overwhelmed her. She washed quickly, wincing as the soap stung her cuts and scrapes, then changed into the offered clothing. The cotton shirt reached almost to her knees, and she had to roll the trousers multiple times, but the clean fabric against her skin felt like a miracle. Outside, she could hear Hunter moving about, speaking occasionally to his animals. The normalcy of it brought an unexpected lump to her throat. 3 months ago, she'd been a respectable Boston lady with prospects and plans. Now she was a fugitive in a stranger's clothes, miles from anything familiar. When Hunter returned, he carried a bundle of dried herbs. "For your feet," he explained, crouching to examine her injuries. "May I?" Faith nodded, extending her feet hesitantly. Hunter worked with gentle efficiency, cleaning the cuts, applying a poultice of crushed herbs, and wrapping her feet in clean bandages. "Where did you learn that?" Faith asked, surprised by his medical knowledge. "My mother was half Cherokee," Hunter replied without looking up. "She knew which plants healed, taught me before she passed." Faith studied him with new interest. "And your father, Irish immigrant, railroad worker?" Hunter tied off the last bandage. "He died in a tunnel collapse when I was 14, left me and Elizabeth to fend for ourselves." "I'm sorry," Faith said softly. Hunter shrugged, standing. "It was a long time ago." He moved to stoke the fire. "We need to consider your situation. Blackstone won't stop looking easily." "Decker has connections with the territorial authorities." Fear coiled in Faith's stomach. "What can I do? I have no money, no family here." Hunter considered for a moment. "My neighbor, Mrs. Garvey, runs the general store in Juniper Creek. She might help." Her husband was the town's doctor before he passed last year. "A town?" Faith asked warily. "Wouldn't that be the first place they'd look?" "Juniper Creek isn't on any maps yet. Too small. Most folks don't even know it exists." Hunter scratched his jaw thoughtfully. "Mrs. Garvey might be able to send a telegraph to the territorial marshal in Prescott. I've heard he's honest, unlike the local sheriff who's in Blackstone's pocket." Faith twisted her hands in her lap. "And if the marshal won't help," Hunter's expression hardened, "then we find another way." He glanced toward the window where dusk was gathering. "For now, you should rest. We'll ride to Juniper Creek tomorrow if you're strong enough." That night, Faith lay awake despite her exhaustion, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night. Through the window, she could see Hunter's silhouette as he sat outside, rifle across his knees, keeping watch. The simple fact that someone was guarding her safety brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Morning arrived with the distant howl of coyotes. Faith woke to find clean water for washing and a dress laid carefully across the foot of the bed. The dress was simple but well made, of faded blue cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar. Hunter was tending the fire when she emerged from behind the curtain, the dress a bit loose but far better than her tattered one. "Mrs. Garvey's daughter left some things behind when she married and moved to California," he explained, not meeting her eyes. "Thought it might fit better than my clothes." "It's perfect," Faith said, touching the fabric gratefully. "Thank you." They ate a breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with honey before preparing to leave for Juniper Creek. Hunter insisted on checking Faith's feet, nodding with satisfaction at the reduced swelling. "You heal quick," he commented, applying fresh bandages. "Still, you shouldn't walk far yet. The ride to Juniper Creek took just over an hour. The town, if it could be called, that consisted of a general store, a small church, a blacksmith shop, and a scattering of homes. Hunter explained that most residents were homesteaders whose properties lay scattered across the surrounding countryside. Mrs. Garvey proved to be a formidable woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She listened without interruption as Hunter explained Faith's situation, her expression growing increasingly grim. "Blackstone," she spat when he finished. "Devil's own enterprise. My Thomas treated 3 girls who escaped from there last year. 2 survived." She turned her penetrating gaze to Faith. "You're fortunate, Miss Spencer. Most don't make it that far across open country." Faith met her eyes steadily. "I had help," she said, glancing at Hunter. Mrs. Garvey nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Well, you're safe enough here for the moment. Hunter's right, Juniper Creek isn't on any maps, but that won't stop Decker's men if they're determined." She considered for a moment. "I can send a message to Marshal Jenkins in Prescott. He's investigated Blackstone before, though nothing came of it. Perhaps your testimony would change that." "How soon could he come?" Hunter asked. 3 days, maybe 4, Mrs. Garvey replied, "assuming he's not off chasing outlaws elsewhere." She turned to Faith. "Until then, you'll stay with me. I have the room, and it's safer than isolated at Hunter's ranch if Decker's men are searching." Faith glanced at Hunter, surprised by her reluctance to part from him. "I don't want to endanger anyone else." "Nonsense," Mrs. Garvey said firmly. "Thomas would never forgive me if I turned away someone in need." She patted Faith's hand. "Besides, I could use the company." Hunter nodded his agreement. "Mrs. Garvey's right, you'll be safer here in town with people around." The decision made, Hunter helped Faith settle into Mrs. Garvey's comfortable home behind the general store. As he prepared to leave, an awkward silence fell between them. "I'll check back tomorrow," Hunter promised. "Bring some supplies." Faith impulsively caught his hand. "Thank you for everything." Something flickered in Hunter's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. He squeezed her fingers briefly before releasing them. "Lock the doors tonight," he instructed, then turned to Mrs. Garvey. "If anything happens, we'll be fine," Mrs. Garvey assured him. "Go on now before it gets dark." Faith watched from the window as Hunter rode away, an unexpected sense of loss washing over her. For the first time since her escape, she would sleep without his protective presence nearby. Mrs. Garvey proved to be both kind and practical. She provided Faith with more clothing, helped treat her healing feet, and asked no invasive questions about her time at Blackstone. That evening, as they sat by the fire drinking tea, the older woman finally broached the subject. "You should know," she said carefully, "that you're not the first to escape from that place. Over the past 2 years, 5 other women have made it this far. 3 moved on to California or back east, too." She hesitated. "What happened to them?" Faith asked quietly. Mrs. Garvey sighed. "Decker's men found them. One was taken back, the other." She shook her head. "She chose a different escape. My Thomas found her. She'd used his medical scissors." Faith shuddered, remembering the single bullet she'd saved in the stolen revolver. "I understand her choice." "Which is why we must be vigilant," Mrs. Garvey said firmly. "I've sent word to the marshal. Until then, you don't leave my sight." The following day passed slowly. Faith helped in the store, keeping to the back room when customers entered. Mrs. Garvey explained her presence as that of a niece visiting from the east, a story most accepted without question. Hunter arrived mid-afternoon, bringing fresh vegetables from his garden and news that there had been riders near his property. "Searching, not just passing through," he reported in a low voice. "Checked the cabin, asked at the McDermott's place about a mile south if they'd seen a blonde woman." Mrs. Garvey's lips thinned. "They're getting closer." "The marshal?" Hunter asked. "No response yet, Mrs. Garvey glanced toward Faith, who was stacking canned goods on a shelf. "She's strong but scared. Woke screaming last night." Hunter's expression darkened. "I should stay in town." "That would only draw attention," Mrs. Garvey countered. "Better you continue as normal. Come by daily, but don't linger." That evening, after Hunter had departed and Mrs. Garvey had closed the store, Faith helped prepare dinner. As they worked side by side, the older woman studied her thoughtfully. Hunter Farley is a good man, she said casually. Keeps to himself mostly, but always the first to help when needed. Faith focused on slicing potatoes. He saved my life. He's been searching for his sister for years, Mrs. Garvey continued. Rides out for weeks sometimes, following rumors, always comes back disappointed. He mentioned her, Faith said quietly. Elizabeth, Mrs. Garvey nodded. Sweet girl, bright. Hunter raised her after their parents died. She paused. He blames himself for letting her go west alone. Faith thought of Hunter's gentle hands bandaging her feet, his vigilant guard outside the cabin. You think she might have ended up somewhere like Blackstone? It's possible, Mrs. Garvey admitted. Such places exist throughout the territories. Men outnumber women 20-1 out here. Some see opportunity in that imbalance. The following day brought an unexpected development. The telegraph operator, a young man named Timothy Wilkes, arrived at the store with news from Prescott. Marshal Jenkins is away tracking the Mason gang, he reported. His deputy says he won't be back for at least 2 weeks. Mrs. Garvey's face fell. Did you explain the urgency? Timothy nodded. Deputy said he'd send word, but the marshal's the only one with authority to investigate across county lines. Faith felt the fragile hope she'd been nurturing crumble. 2 weeks was too long. Decker's men would find her by then. When Hunter arrived later that day, Mrs. Garvey pulled him aside to share the news. Faith watched his expression harden as he listened. We need another plan, he said finally, approaching Faith. Decker's men were in Copper Springs yesterday. That's less than 20 miles from here. What can we do? Faith asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Hunter considered for a moment. We could try to reach Prescott ourselves, find the marshal's office, file a formal complaint. It's 5 days hard riding, Mrs. Garvey objected. Through open country, they'd spot you easily. What about California? Faith suggested. It's further, but Decker has connections there too, Hunter interrupted gently. Mining operations all along the coast. A heavy silence fell. Finally, Mrs. Garvey spoke hesitantly. There is one option we haven't considered, she glanced between them. It's not ideal, but it would offer some protection. Hunter's brow furrowed. What are you suggesting? Marriage, Mrs. Garvey said simply. As Hunter's wife, Faith would have legal protection that an unmarried woman doesn't. Decker couldn't claim she was contractually bound to him if she were already legally bound to someone else. Faith stared at the older woman in shock. You can't be serious. It would be a marriage of convenience only, Mrs. Garvey clarified. Reverend Phillips could perform the ceremony. Once the marshal investigates Blackstone and the danger has passed, you could seek an annulment if desired. Hunter's expression was unreadable. That's asking a lot of both of us. It's asking more of you than her, Mrs. Garvey pointed out. You'd be taking legal responsibility for someone you barely know. Faith shook her head. I can't accept such a sacrifice. Hunter has already risked enough for me. It's not about sacrifice, Mrs. Garvey said firmly. It's about survival. Think of it as a legal shield, nothing more. Hunter rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Would it actually work, legally? Thomas handled a similar case years ago. A woman escaped from a situation in Tucson, married a local rancher. When her former employer came to claim her, the marriage certificate trumped his fraudulent contract. The territorial judge upheld it. Faith looked at Hunter uncertainly. I couldn't ask this of you. Hunter met her gaze steadily. You're not asking, it's being offered. He hesitated. If it would keep you safe until the marshal returns, I'm willing. The simplicity of his statement brought unexpected tears to Faith's eyes. This man, who had already risked so much for a stranger, was willing to bind his life to hers even temporarily to ensure her safety. I'll speak to Reverend Phillips, Mrs. Garvey said, breaking the tension. He can perform the ceremony tomorrow morning. Simple, private, just the necessary witnesses. That night, Faith lay awake in Mrs. Garvey's spare bedroom, her thoughts in turmoil. Marriage, even one of convenience, was not something she had ever imagined entering into under such circumstances. In Boston, she had received 2 proposals, both from respectable gentlemen approved by her aunt. She had declined both, finding neither man stirred any particular feeling in her heart. And now she would marry a frontier rancher she had known for mere days, a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and desperate. A man whose quiet strength and simple kindness had already begun to affect her in ways she wasn't prepared to examine. Morning arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze, a beautiful day for a wedding that was anything but typical. Mrs. Garvey helped Faith dress in her best blue dress, arranging her hair with combs borrowed from the storekeeper's own collection. "There, Mrs. Garvey said, stepping back to assess her work. Simple but dignified. Faith studied her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed both familiar and strange, thinner than she had been in Boston, with new lines of wariness around her eyes, but somehow stronger too. "I never thought my wedding day would be like this," she admitted quietly. Mrs. Garvey squeezed her shoulder. "Life rarely follows the path we expect, especially out here," she hesitated. "Hunter is a good man, Faith. Whatever happens after this danger passes, you could do far worse." The ceremony took place in Reverend Philip's small church. The only attendees were Mrs. Garvey, Timothy Wilkes as second witness, and the Reverend's wife. Hunter arrived wearing clean clothes, his usually unruly brown hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. When Faith entered, his eyes widened slightly, a reaction that sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. The ceremony was brief but proper. Reverend Phillips, a kindly man in his 50s, spoke the traditional words with dignity. When it came time for the vows, Faith was surprised by the steadiness in her own voice as she promised to honor and cherish this near stranger. Hunter's hand was warm and calloused as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's. Mrs. Garvey had whispered to Faith beforehand. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Hunter's kiss was gentle and brief, barely brushing her lips, yet Faith found herself blushing like a schoolgirl. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Farley," Reverend Phillips said, smiling as he presented the marriage certificate. "May God bless your union." The small group shared a modest celebration at Mrs. Garvey's home: coffee, fresh bread, and a fruit pie the older woman had prepared. Throughout it all, Faith was acutely aware of Hunter beside her, of the weight of the ring on her finger, of the strangeness of being addressed as Mrs. Farley. As the afternoon waned, Hunter turned to Faith. "We should head to the ranch before dark," reality crashed back. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a strategy, a shield against danger. Faith nodded, gathering the few belongings Mrs. Garvey had provided her. The ride to Hunter's ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the cabin, Hunter suddenly reined in, Rusty, his posture alert. "Something's wrong," he said quietly, nodding toward the cabin. "Smoke's not right." Faith followed his gaze, noticing the thin, irregular column rising from the chimney. "Someone's there," Hunter nodded grimly, guiding Rusty behind a stand of junipers. "Stay here," he instructed, handing her the reins. "If you hear shooting, ride for Mrs. Garvey's. Don't look back." Before Faith could protest, Hunter had slipped away, moving silently through the underbrush toward his cabin. Faith watched anxiously, one hand gripping the reins, the other pressed against her racing heart. Minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Finally, Hunter reappeared, gesturing for her to join him. Faith approached cautiously, leading Rusty. "Two men," Hunter explained in a low voice. "Deckers, based on their conversation, they're waiting for us to return." "What do we do?" Faith whispered, fear closing her throat. Hunter's expression was determined. "We don't go in. There's a line shack about 3 miles west, near the creek. We'll head there, circle back tomorrow when they're likely to be out searching." They rode double on Rusty, taking a circuitous route through rocky terrain that would hide their tracks. The line shack proved to be a simple one-room structure with a small stove, a narrow cot, and basic supplies. "It's not much," Hunter apologized as he lit the lantern, "but it's secure." Faith looked around the sparse shelter. "It's perfect," she said honestly. After Blackstone, any place with a door she could close herself seemed luxurious. Hunter busied himself starting a fire in the small stove while Faith arranged the meager bedding on the cot. "You should take the cot," Hunter said, not meeting her eyes. "I'll sleep by the stove." Faith flushed, suddenly acutely aware of their new status as husband and wife. "I don't want to displace you." "You're not," Hunter assured her, focusing on feeding kindling into the stove. "I've slept on harder ground than this floor." An awkward silence fell between them. Faith sat on the edge of the cot, absently twisting the gold band on her finger. "I'm sorry," Hunter said suddenly. Faith looked up in surprise. "For what? This situation, the wedding, having to hide in a lined shack on your wedding night," he gestured vaguely. "All of it." "None of it is your fault," Faith said gently. "You've done nothing but help me since the moment we met." Hunter ran a hand through his hair, his discomfort evident. "Still, it's not what any woman dreams of." Faith couldn't help a small, sad laugh. "My dreams adjusted considerably after Blackstone." She met his eyes. "This marriage may be unconventional, but it was my choice. A free choice. That means more than you can know." Something shifted in Hunter's expression, understanding, perhaps, or respect. He nodded once, then turned back to preparing a simple meal from the supplies they'd brought. They ate quietly, the small space filled with the crackling of the fire and the distant call of coyotes. When they'd finished, Hunter checked the windows and door one final time before settling onto the floor with his bedroll, his rifle within easy reach. "Try to rest," he said, extinguishing the lantern. "Tomorrow will be a long day." In the darkness, Faith lay awake, listening to Hunter's steady breathing. This strange man was now her husband legally, if not in practice. The thought should have terrified her, yet somehow it didn't. Instead, she felt an odd sense of peace knowing he was near. Dawn arrived with a gentle rain that pattered against the shack's tin roof. Hunter was already awake, brewing coffee on the small stove when Faith opened her eyes. "Storm's passing through," he said, offering her a cup. "Good for us. Rain will wash away any tracks we left yesterday." They shared a breakfast of jerky and hardtack before Hunter outlined his plan. "We'll circle back to the ranch. If Decker's men are still there, we'll head straight for Juniper Creek and regroup." "And if they're gone?" Faith asked. "We gather what we need and move on. It's not safe to stay in one place too long." Hunter checked his revolver methodically. "Once we know they've been at the ranch, they'll keep coming back." The rain eased as they prepared to leave. Hunter insisted Faith wear his oilskin coat for protection against the damp, the gesture touching her deeply. They approached the ranch cautiously, Hunter leading Rusty through the trees that bordered the property. From their vantage point, they could see the cabin stood empty, the corral gate swinging open in the breeze. "They've gone," Hunter murmured, "but not long ago, campfires still smoking." Faith felt him tense beside her. "What is it?" "Dash isn't barking," Hunter said grimly. "He always barks when someone approaches." Understanding dawned coldly. "You think they stay here?" Hunter instructed, drawing his revolver. "If anything happens, ride hard for Juniper Creek." Faith watched anxiously as Hunter moved silently toward the cabin, keeping to cover where possible. He disappeared inside briefly before emerging to check the barn and corral. Finally, he waved her forward. "They've gone," he confirmed as Faith approached. "Took some supplies, left a mess." His expression darkened. "Shot Dash, he's alive but wounded." Faith followed Hunter into the barn where the border collie lay on a pile of hay, whimpering softly. A blood-stained bandage encircled his hindquarters. "I did what I could for him," Hunter said, kneeling beside the dog. "Bullet went clean through, but he's weak from blood loss." Faith crouched beside him, gently stroking the dog's head. "Will he recover if infection doesn't set in?" Hunter checked the bandage. "He's tough, but we can't move him yet." Faith nodded, understanding the implication. "We'll have to stay." Hunter's jaw tightened. "Just long enough to gather supplies and for Dash to stabilize, then we move on." He glanced toward the cabin. They left a message, scratched into the table. Faith followed him into the cabin, gasping when she saw the crude words carved into the wooden tabletop, "Property of Blackstone." "Return or die." "They know I'm with you," she whispered, her hand instinctively seeking Hunter's. Hunter's fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring. "You're not property," he said firmly. "You're my wife." The words, though spoken pragmatically, sent an unexpected warmth through Faith. She squeezed his hand gratefully before releasing it to help assess the damage to the cabin. The intruders had ransacked the place thoroughly, clearly searching for any clue to Faith's identity or destination. Books had been pulled from shelves, the mattress slashed, food supplies scattered. It took hours to restore some semblance of order, all while maintaining vigilant watch for any sign of return. By evening, Faith had prepared a simple meal from the remaining supplies while Hunter tended to Dash and reinforced the cabin's defenses. They ate in companionable silence, exhaustion evident in both their faces. "We should take turns keeping watch tonight," Hunter said as he cleared the plates. "I'll take first shift," Faith nodded, too tired to argue. "Wake me in a few hours." She had just settled onto the newly repaired bed when Hunter's voice stopped her. "Faith," he said hesitantly, "I've been thinking about our situation." She turned to face him, noting the uncertainty in his expression. "What about it?" "This marriage," Hunter began, choosing his words carefully, "it doesn't have to be temporary if you wanted to stay after this is over." Faith stared at him, surprised by the offer. "You mean continue as husband and wife, truly?" Hunter nodded, his gaze steady despite the flush creeping up his neck. "Life out here is hard for a woman alone, and he hesitated. "I've grown to respect you, care for you even. We could build something good here, I think." The sincerity in his voice touched Faith deeply. This wasn't merely charity or obligation, it was a genuine offer of partnership. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "I never expected." "You don't need to answer now," Hunter said quickly. "Just consider it." Faith nodded, her thoughts whirling as she lay back on the bed. Marriage to Hunter, real marriage, not just a legal shield, was something she hadn't allowed herself to contemplate. Yet now that he'd suggested it, she found the idea far from unwelcome. She drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams a confused tangle of pursuers and sanctuary, of danger and safety embodied in Hunter's steady presence. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the pre-dawn stillness. Faith bolted upright as Hunter burst through the door, his expression grim. "They're back." "At least 4 of them." Another shot rang out, splintering the window frame. Faith scrambled from the bed, heart pounding. "Take this," Hunter said, pressing a revolver into her hand. "Stay low, away from the windows." Faith's hands trembled as she gripped the weapon. "What are we going to do?" Hunter checked his rifle methodically. "Hold them off as long as we can. Hope they're not willing to risk a prolonged siege," a voice called from outside, harsh in the early morning light. "Send out the woman, Farley. She belongs to Blackstone." Hunter's jaw tightened. "She belongs to no one," he muttered before calling back. "She's my wife, legally married in Juniper Creek. You have no claim on her." Laughter greeted his declaration. "Marriage don't erase debt, Farley. Decker wants his property back, and he's paying good money for her return." Hunter positioned himself by the window, rifle ready. "Get behind the stone hearth," he instructed Faith. "It's the safest spot if they start shooting." Faith moved to comply, then hesitated. "What about Dash in the root cellar?" Hunter replied, not taking his eyes from the window. "Safest place for him?" Another shot struck the cabin, this one splintering the door. Hunter returned fire, his expression coldly focused. 4 of them, he reported. 2 by the corral, 1 behind the water trough, 1 by the big oak. Faith's mind raced. 4 against 2, and she was hardly an experienced fighter. What if we tried to reason with them? Offer money? Hunter shook his head grimly. Men like that don't respond to reason, and Decker wants more than money. He fired again, a grunt of satisfaction indicating he'd hit his target. "That's 1 down, wounded, not dead." The standoff continued as the sun rose higher. Occasional shots were exchanged, but the attackers seemed wary of approaching the cabin directly. Faith kept her revolver ready, watching Hunter with growing admiration. He remained calm despite the danger, his movements deliberate and efficient. By mid-morning, an uneasy silence had fallen. The attackers had ceased firing, though Hunter assured Faith they remained in position. "They're waiting us out," he explained, checking their dwindling ammunition. "Hoping we'll get desperate." Faith passed him the canteen. "How long can we hold out?" "Water for 2 days, food for 3 if we're careful." Hunter took a careful sip. "Ammunition's the bigger concern. 20 rounds for the rifle, 12 for your revolver." Faith considered their options. "Could we slip out after dark, make for Juniper Creek?" "They'll be watching for that," Hunter replied. But he broke off, his head tilting as he caught a new sound. Riders coming, more than one. Faith's heart sank. Reinforcements. Hunter moved to the rear window, peering cautiously outside. His expression changed to one of cautious hope. "It's Timothy and others from Juniper Creek." Relief washed over Faith as she recognized the young telegraph operator leading a group of 5 armed men toward the cabin. One of the attackers shouted in alarm and gunfire erupted again, this time from multiple directions. The skirmish was brief but intense. When it ended, 2 of Decker's men lay wounded, 1 had fled, and the 4th had surrendered. Timothy approached the cabin, calling Hunter's name. "It's safe to come out," he shouted. "We've got them." Hunter opened the door cautiously, rifle still ready. Faith followed, staying close to his side. Timothy grinned at their surprised expressions. "Mrs. Garvey was worried when you didn't return yesterday, asked me to check on you." His grin widened. "Good thing I brought friends." The men from Juniper Creek had efficiently disarmed and bound the remaining attackers. One of them, a blacksmith named Samuel Brown, approached Hunter and Faith. "Got some news you'll want to hear," he said, wiping blood from a cut above his eye. Marshal Jenkins returned early. He's in Prescott now, gathering a posse to investigate Blackstone. Faith gasped. "He knows about the camp," Samuel nodded. "Timothy's telegraph reached him after all. He's planning to ride out tomorrow." Hope, fragile but persistent, bloomed in Faith's chest. If the marshal was investigating Blackstone, perhaps Decker's reign of terror might finally end. Hunter's arm settled around her shoulders, steady and protective. "We should ride for Prescott," he said. "Your testimony could help the marshal build his case." The journey to Prescott took 2 days, traveling with the men from Juniper Creek, who insisted on escorting them safely to the territorial capital. Dash, still recovering but stable, remained in Mrs. Garvey's care. Prescott proved larger and more established than Faith had expected, with proper buildings, a courthouse, and even a hotel. Marshal Jenkins received them immediately upon their arrival, a tall, weathered man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. Farley," he greeted Faith, the use of her married name still startling her. "I understand you escaped from Blackstone Mining Camp." Faith nodded, taking the seat he offered. 3 months ago, I wasn't the only woman held there against her will." For the next hour, Faith recounted her experience in detail, the deception that had brought her west, the conditions at the camp, the other women still imprisoned there. Hunter remained at her side throughout, his presence giving her strength when memories threatened to overwhelm her. Marshal Jenkins took meticulous notes, his expression darkening as her story unfolded. When she finished, he set down his pencil with grim determination. "You're not the first to bring allegations against Blackstone," he said, "but you're the first with such detailed information." He glanced at Hunter, "And the first with corroboration from a respected local." Hunter nodded acknowledgement. "There are rumors of other camps like Blackstone throughout the territory, including one near Flagstaff," Faith added quietly. "The women at Blackstone spoke of it." "Called it the Summit." Marshal Jenkins' eyebrows rose. "That matches reports I've received from the north." He straightened, decision made. "I'm riding for Blackstone tomorrow with 10 deputies. We'll shut it down and arrest Decker." "I want to come with you," Faith said firmly. Both men looked at her in surprise. "That's not necessary, Mrs. Farley," the marshal began. "It is," Faith insisted. "Those women know me. They'll trust me when I say it's safe to come out." She met Hunter's concerned gaze. "I need to do this for them and for myself." Hunter studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "We'll both go." Marshal Jenkins considered, then agreed. "Stay behind the deputies. If there's any fighting, you keep well clear." The following morning found them riding with the marshal's posse toward Blackstone. Faith wore trousers borrowed from the marshal's daughter, more practical for riding than a dress. The familiar fear tightened her chest as they approached the camp, but Hunter's presence beside her kept panic at bay. Blackstone Mining Camp appeared exactly as Faith remembered, a collection of rough buildings surrounded by a high wooden fence. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their rifles visible even from a distance. Marshal Jenkins divided his men strategically before approaching the main gate, his badge prominently displayed. U.S. Marshal, open up in the name of the law. What followed was both anticlimactic and profoundly satisfying. Faced with overwhelming official force, Most of Blackstone's guards surrendered without resistance. Only Decker himself attempted to flee, making for the stables before being cut off by two deputies. Faith watched from horseback as the man who had terrorized her for months was handcuffed and led away, his arrogant demeanor crumbling in the face of justice. The satisfaction she'd expected to feel was tempered by something else, pity, perhaps, for a man whose life had been devoted to cruelty. With Decker secured, Faith accompanied Hunter and the marshal to the women's quarters, a long, low building with barred windows. Marshal Jenkins broke the lock, allowing Faith to enter first. 7 women stared back at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to desperate hope. Faith recognized them all, had worked alongside them, shared meager meals with them, whispered encouragement when guards weren't listening. "Faith," one woman whispered, a thin blonde named Clara. "Is it really you?" Faith nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "It's over," she said simply. "You're free." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The women were brought food and water, their injuries tended, their stories recorded by the marshal's deputies. Faith moved among them, offering comfort and reassurance, introducing Hunter as "my husband" with growing confidence. By evening, arrangements had been made to transport everyone to Prescott. Several women wished to return east immediately. Others, with no homes to return to, would remain in the territory under the marshal's protection until more permanent solutions could be found. As they prepared to depart, Clara approached Faith, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You came back for us," she said wonderingly. "You could have just run, gone east, forgotten this place." Faith shook her head. "I couldn't forget, not ever." She glanced at Hunter, who was helping load supplies onto a wagon. "But I did find something I wasn't expecting." Clara followed her gaze, a small smile forming. "He seems like a good man." "He is," Faith confirmed, the simple truth of it warming her heart. "The best I've known." The journey back to Prescott was slow, accommodating the weakened condition of some of the rescued women. Faith rode beside Hunter, increasingly aware of a shift in their relationship. The pretense of their marriage had somehow, gradually, become something genuine. In Prescott, the women were settled into temporary accommodations while the marshal's investigation continued. Evidence seized from Blackstone implicated several prominent businessmen in the operation, as well as confirming the existence of other camps throughout the territory. "This goes deeper than I expected," Marshal Jenkins admitted to Faith and Hunter as they sat in his office 2 days after the raid. "Decker was just a manager. The real owners are in San Francisco and Denver." He shuffled through papers on his desk. "One name keeps appearing in the records, Elizabeth Farley." Hunter went still beside Faith. "What?" The marshal looked up, suddenly realizing the significance. "Your sister?" Hunter nodded, his face pale. "She disappeared 5 years ago, traveling to a teaching position in Santa Fe." Marshal Jenkins pulled out a specific document. According to this, she was taken to a camp called the Summit near Flagstaff, later transferred to another operation in Colorado Territory. He hesitated. "The records stopped 3 years ago." Faith reached for Hunter's hand, finding it cold and rigid. "Is there anything indicating what happened to her?" The marshal shook his head. "Nothing definitive, but I've already wired the Colorado authorities. If she's still there, we'll find her." Hope and grief warred in Hunter's expression. 3 years without any record," he said quietly. "That's not promising." "Don't give up," Faith urged, squeezing his hand. "Not yet." They left the marshal's office with a promise to return the following day for any updates. Walking back to their hotel, Hunter remained silent, his thoughts clearly far away. Faith gave him space, understanding his need to process this new information about his sister. That evening, as they prepared for dinner in their shared hotel room, a concession to their married status that still brought a blush to Faith's cheeks, Hunter finally spoke. "I've been searching for 5 years," he said, staring out the window at Prescott's Main Street. "Following every lead, every rumor, never found a trace." He turned to Faith, his expression raw with emotion. "Now I learned she was trapped in the same nightmare you escaped." Faith crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "We don't know her fate yet. There's still hope." Hunter's fingers tightened around hers. "I should have protected her, should never have let her travel alone. You couldn't have known, Faith said gently. Any more than I could have known what awaited me when I left Boston. Hunter studied her face, seeming to draw strength from her certainty. How do you do that? Stay hopeful after everything you've endured? Faith considered the question seriously. Because giving up means they win, she said finally. Decker, men like him, they want us broken, dependent, afraid. Every day I refuse to be those things is a victory. Something shifted in Hunter's expression, admiration, perhaps, or deeper understanding. He raised one hand to touch her cheek, the gesture tentative but tender. When I suggested our marriage might continue, he said quietly, I meant it, not from obligation or protection, but because I've come to care for you, Faith, deeply. Faith leaned into his touch, her heart quickening. I've come to care for you too, she admitted. More than I thought possible in such a short time. Hunter's smile, rare and genuine, transformed his face. I'm not good with fancy words, but I promise to be a true husband to you if you'll have me. Faith answered by rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his, their first real kiss, not the brief, formal touch from their wedding, but something warm and promising. Hunter's arms encircled her, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, conveying what words could not. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Faith knew with certainty that this marriage, begun as a shield against danger, had become something true and lasting. The following week brought a flurry of developments. Marshal Jenkins' investigation expanded, leading to arrests in Prescott and telegraphed warrants to San Francisco. Decker and his men faced multiple charges, with Faith and the other women providing testimony that ensured they would face justice. News from Colorado arrived piece by piece. Elizabeth Farley had indeed been held at a camp near Denver, but had escaped during a winter storm 2 years earlier. Her subsequent fate remained unknown, though one report suggested she had been taken in by a Ute family traveling south. It's something, Hunter said, clinging to this thread of hope, more than I've had in years. Faith supported him through these revelations, her own strength growing as she helped the other women from Blackstone adjust to freedom. Some chose to return east, others, including Clara, decided to remain in the territory and build new lives. What will you do now? Clara asked Faith as they shared tea in the hotel dining room. Will you go back to Boston? Faith considered the question. No, she said with certainty. My life is here now, with Hunter. Clara smiled knowingly. Your marriage of convenience doesn't look so convenient anymore. Faith blushed but didn't deny it. He's a good man, patient, kind, stronger than he knows. And handsome, Clara added with a wink. Those eyes of his could melt stone. Faith laughed, the sound still somewhat unfamiliar but increasingly natural. That too. As the investigation continued, Faith and Hunter began discussing their future. The ranch would need significant work after the attack, the garden would need replanting, Dash would require ongoing care as he recovered. It won't be easy, Hunter cautioned as they walked along Prescott's boardwalk one evening. Ranch life is hard in the best of times. Faith tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. I'm stronger than I look, and I learn quickly. Hunter smiled down at her, affection evident in his gaze. That you do. He hesitated before adding, I was thinking we might expand the cabin, add another room or two. Faith understood the implication immediately, warmth spreading through her chest. For a family, Hunter nodded, suddenly appearing almost shy, if you wanted that. Children, I mean. Faith had never allowed herself to imagine a family during her time at Blackstone, the future too uncertain and frightening. Now, with Hunter, the possibility seemed not just achievable but desirable. I would like that, she said softly, very much. 10 days after the raid on Blackstone, Marshal Jenkins deemed it safe for them to return to Hunter's ranch. The remaining men from Decker's operation had been captured or driven from the territory, and the marshal promised ongoing patrols to ensure no resurgence of such activities. The return journey felt different from their flight to Prescott, hopeful rather than desperate, a beginning rather than an escape. When the familiar outline of Hunter's cabin appeared on the horizon, Faith felt an unexpected sense of homecoming. Dash greeted them enthusiastically, his recovery progressing well under Mrs. Garvey's care. The cabin itself still bore scars from the attack, but seemed somehow more welcoming than Faith remembered. "Welcome home, Mrs. Farley," Hunter said quietly as he helped her down from her horse. Faith smiled up at him, her heart full. "It's good to be home." That evening, as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson, Faith reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this place. 3 months of captivity, a desperate escape, a marriage of convenience that had become something true and precious. None of it could have been predicted when she left Boston seeking a respectable position. "What are you thinking?" Hunter asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. Faith leaned into him, savoring his solid presence. "About paths," she replied. "How the worst path can sometimes lead to the best destination." Hunter's expression grew thoughtful. "Do you regret coming west?" Faith considered the question carefully. "I regret the suffering mine and others. I regret that your sister and so many women experienced such cruelty." She turned to face him fully. "But I cannot regret finding you." Hunter's eyes darkened with emotion. "Nor I you," he said simply, before lowering his mouth to hers. Later, as they prepared for bed, no longer separated by propriety or uncertainty, Faith found herself grateful for the strange, difficult journey that had brought her to this man and this place. The future held challenges, certainly, but also promise and possibility. "Hunter," she said as he extinguished the lamp, "I never imagined I could feel this way, safe, hopeful, loved." In the darkness, his hand found hers. "I never imagined it either. After Elizabeth disappeared, I stopped believing in anything good." His voice softened. "You changed that, Faith." As they drifted towards sleep, Faith's last conscious thought was of the desperate woman who had pleaded, "Don't send me back there," and the cowboy who had lifted her onto his horse. From that moment of terror and compassion had grown something beautiful, and enduring a love neither had been seeking but both had found. 5 years later, the Farley Ranch had expanded considerably. The cabin now boasted 3 additional rooms, a proper kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The herd had grown from Hunter's original small group to nearly 100 head of cattle, and the garden produced enough vegetables to sell the excess in Juniper Creek, which had grown into a proper town with a school and even a small newspaper. Faith stood on the porch, watching as Hunter demonstrated to their 4-year-old son, Thomas, how to brush down a gentle mare. Their daughter, Elizabeth, named for Hunter's sister, sat on a blanket nearby, her 2-year-old hands busily arranging pine cones in patterns only she understood. The years had brought changes beyond the growth of their family and ranch. Marshal Jenkins' investigation had eventually dismantled the network of camps throughout the territory, bringing justice to dozens of men involved in the operation. More importantly, it had led to the rescue of over 30 women held against their will. Faith had remained active in supporting these survivors, working with Mrs. Garvey to establish a women's aid society in Juniper Creek that provided shelter and employment opportunities. Several former captives had settled in the area, building new lives free from their past trauma. Most significantly for Hunter, the investigation had finally uncovered the fate of his sister. Elizabeth Farley had indeed escaped the Colorado camp during a blizzard, had been taken in by a Ute family, and eventually made her way to California. A series of letters forwarded through the marshal's office had led to a reunion 2 years earlier, a day of tears, laughter, and healing for both siblings. Elizabeth now lived in San Francisco with her husband, a kind-hearted doctor who had helped her recover from her ordeal. "Mama, look." Thomas called, proudly demonstrating his brushing technique. "Just like Papa showed me," Faith smiled, waving acknowledgement. "Very good, sweetheart." Hunter glanced up, catching her eye across the yard. After 5 years of marriage, his gaze still held the power to warm her from within. Affection, respect, and desire all mingled together. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the landscape in amber light, Faith reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From Boston society lady to captive, from desperate fugitive to rancher's wife and mother, a path no one could have predicted, least of all herself. Dash, now elderly but still vigilant, thumped his tail against the porch boards as he sensed her contemplative mood. Faith scratched behind his ears, grateful for the loyal dog who had been part of her journey from the beginning. Hunter approached, Thomas riding on his shoulders while Elizabeth toddled alongside, clinging to her father's pant leg. The sight of them, her family, her heart walking outside her body, filled Faith with a joy so profound it nearly overwhelmed her. "What's that smile for?" Hunter asked as he climbed the porch steps, settling Thomas on his feet. Faith reached for his hand, twining their fingers together. "Just counting my blessings," she replied softly. Hunter's expression softened as he pulled her gently into his embrace, children clinging to both their legs. "I count mine every day," he murmured against her hair. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and the ranch had settled into nighttime stillness, Faith and Hunter sat on the porch swing, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the stars emerge. "I received a letter from Clara today," Faith said, referring to her friend from Blackstone who now ran a successful dressmaking shop in Prescott. "She's getting married in the spring." Hunter squeezed her hand. "That's good news. She deserves happiness." Faith nodded agreement. "She asked if we would attend. I said yes, if you didn't mind." "Of course we'll go," Hunter replied. The children would enjoy the trip. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the gentle creaking of the swing the only sound besides the distant call of coyotes. "Do you ever think about it?" Hunter asked eventually. That day we met, Faith didn't need clarification. That day remained vivid in both their memories, her desperate flight, his timely intervention, the words that had changed both their lives. "Don't send me back there." "Often," she admitted. "I was so terrified. So certain I'd be caught." She turned to look at him, tracing the familiar lines of his face with her gaze. "Then there you were, like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even known how to form." Hunter's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I was just tracking a coyote," he said with typical modesty. "Right place, right time." Faith shook her head, smiling. "It was more than that, it was Providence." She reached up to touch his cheek, her fingertips brushing against the beard he'd grown over the past year. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved." Hunter turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. "You saved me too," he said quietly. "I was just existing before you, not really living." The simple truth of his words warmed Faith's heart. Their love had grown from desperate circumstances into something enduring and profound, a partnership of equals. A family bound by choice rather than obligation. As the moon rose over the desert landscape they both now called home, Faith offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here to this man, these children, this life built with love and perseverance. "I love you, Hunter Farley," she whispered, the words familiar but never routine. His answering smile, visible even in the moonlight, held all the certainty and promise she would ever need. "And I love you, Faith Farley, today and always." In the quiet darkness of the Arizona night, surrounded by the home they had built together, Faith knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The path had been difficult, sometimes terrifying, but it had led her home to a love that had begun with a desperate plea and a cowboy's compassion, and had grown into the greatest blessing of her life.